Year is 1976, at the Joint Security Area at the Korean DMZ. The Cold War, at this point, is in full swing. Tensions are high, and amidst it all, North Korean soldiers would attack American and South Korean soldiers, killing 2 Americans in the process. Their justification for doing so was over a tree. Little do they know the bomb that they had decided to poke was nuclear. America's response would be nothing short of freedom, liberty, and justice. Ladies and gentlemen, their response would receive the name of Operation Paul Bunyan, America's ultimate show of force to the North Koreans. Once again, we have to take a step back to see why this all occurred. After 3 years of fighting, North and South Korean leadership would meet up on July 27th, 1953 to sign an armistice. This in turn would pause the Korean War, practically ending it. With that, 160-mile long and 2.5-mile width demilitarized zone would come to life, pretty much right down the middle of Korea. Now this armistice would be signed in a little town called Panmunjom, which is closer to the west side of Korea. This would be a historical place and would soon become the Joint Security Area. This is the only area of the demilitarized zone where North and South Korean forces would be able to meet face to face. And because of that, rules were imposed. One being absolutely no guns. And for the most part, people would listen to this rule. But the leadership knew what they were doing, because many fights would break out over the years. And lucky for this rule, no soldiers would be killed at the JSA for now. Fast forwarding to August 6, 1976, there would be a bridge in the JSA called the Bridge of No Return. This was because if you crossed it, you would enter into North Korea, essentially trapping yourself. Now on both sides of the bridge would be a North and a South Korean checkpoint. And right next to the South Korean checkpoint, there would be a tree, and this tree would be seen as a problem. This is because all the other checkpoints were not able to see checkpoint 3, making it practically invisible from any other vantage point. Why was this a problem, you may ask? Well, in theory, the South Korean forces thought that if the North Koreans were to invade, they would be using that bridge. And what was across that bridge? That checkpoint. So they thought that if the North Koreans would cross that bridge, they would take over that checkpoint and establish a garrison, in turn being able to take out all the other checkpoints rather quickly. And the South Koreans would attempt to take this tree down, but their attempt would be faulty. This is because the North Koreans would shortly show up on the Bridge of No Return and say, hey, you can't cut that down. And the South Koreans were pretty much like, all right, bet. We're gonna bring back the Americans. And they would return a couple weeks later on August 15th with a working party of 15 men. This party would be comprised of American and South Korean soldiers. These men would obviously be tasked with taking this tree down. And shortly after they got there, the North Koreans would show up once more. This time with 11 soldiers, one being Lieutenant Pak Chol. Lieutenant Pak Chol would be nicknamed the Bulldog due to his tendency to instigate fights in the JSA. He would go up to these men and tell them to stop cutting the tree down. The reasoning for that is because that very tree was planted by none other than Kim Il-sung himself. Don't know who that is? That was the founder of North Korea. I mean, makes sense, like a leader planted that tree, it's obviously shouldn't come down. It's a totally believable story, right? When the soldiers would refuse to stop cutting the tree down, the Bulldog would send a runner to go get more troops. That run would come back shortly after, followed by 2 trucks, 30 men total, wielding clubs. The Bulldog would ask one more time to stop cutting the tree down, and the working party would continue to hack at this tree, believing that nothing would happen. It's at this point where the Bulldog would, quote, take off his watch, wrap it in a handkerchief, and put it down. At that moment, he would yell, kill! All at one time, the North Korean soldiers would charge and overrun the American and South Korean working party. In their haste, the working party would drop their axes, running for their lives, unintentionally giving the North Koreans an actual weapon to work with. Being overrun and completely surrounded, all but 1 American and 1 South Korean would be hurt in this conflict. Unfortunately as well, 2 Americans would lose their lives that day. Captain Arthur G. Boniface would be struck with an axe and killed on the spot. And First Lieutenant Mark T. Barrett would be bludgeoned to death, being hit with crowbars and clubs. Upon hearing this, the American and the South Korean government would go into DEFCON 3, the highest level of military readiness without actually being at war. And off rip, the North Korean government would lie and say that the working party were the aggressors, saying that they were the ones overrun and they had to act in self-defense. Yet, reviewing security footage from the cameras close by, both militaries would see the truth of what really happened that day. It's at this point where ideas are being thrown around on how to respond to this. 2 Americans that just lost their lives. America is not going to take this lightly. Their options were destroy the bridge, drop a bomb on the DMZ, or drop a nuke off the coast of North Korea as a show of force. But no, America wanted a proportional response. What's proportional, you may ask? Well, on August 21st at 7 a.m., a bunch of American and South Korean vehicles would drive into the JSA, officially starting Operation Paul Bunyan. In those vehicles is a 16-man crew of tree trimmers who are escorted by 60 soldiers wielding axes and pistols. Not only that, but 64 Black Berets, which are basically the South Korean Special Forces. They would show up and arm themselves with M16s, grenade launchers, and anti-tank weapons. And some would strap claymores to their chest, allegedly going to the other side of the bridge of return, brandishing their detonators, practically praying for the North Koreans to charge them. And as the working party would get to work, the North Koreans would be forced to watch. Because not only would the Americans and the South Koreans have grunts on the ground, but they would also bring 20 Huey utility helicopters, with over 100 men on those helicopters ready to touch ground within a moment's notice. They would also have 7 Cobra attack choppers, around 12 to 20 B-52 Stratofortresses, each allegedly carrying about 70,000 pounds of bombs, a squadron of F-4 Phantoms, a squadron of Korean F-5s, 6 to 8 F-111 Aardvarks, USS Midway with their entire security detail, and a tank. Oh wait, and I can't forget about the 10,000 troops that were on the South Korean border ready to charge, and an additional 12,000 en route just in case. As the men continued hacking at this tree, about 5 minutes later, a bunch of North Korean trucks would pull up to the bridge of no return, and 150 North Korean soldiers would stand in front of the bridge of return, just watching the tree that Kim Il-sung planted get chopped down. And after the most awkward 35 minutes, the tree is finally cut down, making Operation Paul Bunyan a success. And funny enough, that working party left a huge stump of that tree, so anytime the North Koreans looked out, they saw that tree and got reminded of what happened that day. And that would be that. The North Korean government would be forced to pay reparations to the families of the soldiers who they killed. And the North Korean government would call the whole ordeal regrettable, which is the closest I'm sorry that you're ever gonna get from the North Koreans. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the story of Operation Paul Bunyan, one of America's greatest show of forces. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is 100% one of my most favorite stories, and I was so happy to share this with you guys. Thank you all so much for watching. Show some love if you guys enjoyed. You all have a good day and a good night. Peace.